We have some new updates on the origin of COVID mystery to go over with you. The Wuhan Institute of Virology now has the right to ask a partnering lab in the U.S. to delete data. This is according to legal documents obtained by the U.S. Right to Know. This comes after more news. According to a new letter, recent reporting contradicts what an attorney for a key virologist in this saga, Kristen Anderson, told Congress previously, specifically the claim that he was not aware of any effort to suppress any particular theory about the origins of SARS-CoV-2.
Joining us now to discuss is Emily Kopp, reporter at U.S. Right to Know. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So what's going on? Help us unpack what's new here.
Right. So I think what's important to clarify is that this agreement goes back even before the pandemic. But I think what it shows is that the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Chinese Academy of Sciences had an interest in ensuring that it could delete important data if it so needed. And so I think this just raises a lot of questions about, first, why a scientific institution would require this provision in a legal agreement, and then second, why U.S. virologists in this U.S. lab in Texas would agree to such a provision. And another important thing to note here is that the Texas lab is publicly funded, so that raises a myriad of legal questions about records retention, and my organization is really focused on submitting FOIA requests and putting more information into the public sphere. And this sort of raises some questions. Are there clues here related to the origins of COVID that we can't access because U.S. publicly funded institutions agreed to delete data on behalf of the WIV?
So this is legally they're allowed to do this. Do we know why they were granted the legal right to delete the data? Because it wasn't just, or was this just a request by Wuhan Institute and they said, yeah, okay, we'll do it? Or was this actually a legal, they're allowed to legally to do this for some reason? Is it because the information's the property of China and the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of unknowns here. So this is a memorandum of understanding, which isn't quite a contract, but it's sort of a legal agreement commonly entered into between research institutions. And it's not clear who wrote it, but there are some clues. There are some sort of clunky or unusual provisions in this that suggest it might have been written by Chinese partners and sort of agreed to by the lab in Texas. And so I think the unknowns here are if this was, purely academic work, typically we would want that work to benefit society and to be public. So why was there this requirement that, if either of the labs asked, all of the data and documents related to this collaboration would be deleted? And looking at this BSL-4, the highest maximum biocontainment lab in Texas, why they would agree to it, I think there was this push to understand what sort of, high-risk virology research was going on in China. And so perhaps labs in the U.S. were willing to enter into let's just say legally shaky agreements in order to gain some insight into what was going on. But clearly, if there were clues to the COVID origin story at this lab in Texas, we might not even know about them because of this provision.
Can you give me a sense of what level of investigations, how many investigations or legal actions are going on trying to get to the root of what caused the virus? Because you would think something of this magnitude would have a level of inquiry surrounding it that was at least as notable and I'd say covered by the press as something like inquiries into Trump's finances and the like. But I feel like I know very little about how much is going into getting at the bottom of the origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes to sort of the more recent letter from from congressional Republicans surrounding whether or not Christian Anderson was being a virologist in California was being perfectly honest when he said that he wasn't involved in any efforts to suppress any theory about the COVID origin story. Essentially, what we've seen over the last 2 years is virologists saying one thing in public and then another thing in private. And what my organization, US Right to Know, has found through FOIA requests is that at the same time, many virologists and scientists were saying any sort of implication that this, novel coronavirus could have come from the novel coronavirus labs in Wuhan is a conspiracy theory. They were saying in private amongst each other that was a very real possibility. And some features of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, are a little bit unusual and may point to it not having arisen in nature. So I think there's this kind of false consensus in the press built sort of on these not totally truthful public statements. And, another thing I'll say is that our organization gets a lot of flack just for looking into this. And so any reporter who wants to sort of investigate this very real possibility, this, very possible connection between the Wuhan Institute of Virology or the Wuhan CDC lab and SARS-CoV-2 risks being called a conspiracy theorist. So, so I think that's a big element there. But you asked, what we can expect going forward. The World Health Organization did put together a group called SAGO that is going to essentially put out a report of what science is needed going forward to exculpate the labs in Wuhan and also, get down to the bottom of how this pandemic started. In order to do any sort of on-the-ground reporting, you would need buy-in from China, and that doesn't look like a possibility. So this is sort of the best the WHO can do. And then, in the US, we, have some clues because of the funding that the National Institutes of Health, a, publicly funded institution, gave to the Wuhan Institute of Virology through this sort of intermediary nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance. Those are records that are available to congressional investigators if they so choose. And we know that the Senate Health Committee is interested in investigating both, what sort of went wrong with the U.S. response, but also how this pandemic started. And there are a bunch of committees in the House also that I think should Republicans get the majority would be interested in subpoenaing documents and figuring out what happened here.
Interesting. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us. Very interesting update to all of this and finding out that maybe, if they're deleting records, we might not find out some things, which is, highly problematic, obviously. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know that there are scientists and reporters who are dedicated to learning more. So, so hopefully we'll learn more. But thanks so much.
Hopefully, that's for sure. All right. But we'll have more Rising coming up next.